Hello and welcome. So, the subject that I want to talk to you guys about today may not be well received by some, and that's okay. It's a message for those who are ready to hear it, and if you're not, I completely understand. Do your thing. I see so many people, and I know this has been a constant throughout history, it's just been in my face a lot lately. So many people talking about twin flames and soulmates and finding their next love and etc. And this constant idea in our society that there's something wrong with being single. And like I said, not everybody's going to be ready to hear this, but if you're feeling any kind of desperation to find another person to complete you or to be that kind of twin flame energy or soulmate energy with you, if this is something you're actively seeking and thinking about and focusing on, you have a deficit of self-love. And this is a hard-won lesson that you can make easy if you choose to. I chose not to. And that's what got me to where I am now. Because I started coming into this realization. I started to arrive in this place about 12 years ago. And at the time, I was newly single, and I had told myself that I needed to take time and process and to make a promise to myself that I was going to put myself first and that being single was okay and that I needed to step out of the whole relationship dating arena for a while. But what I ended up doing was only being single for about a year, and I mean technically even that isn't true because I was actively dating through most of that year, so even suggesting that I was single for a year is kidding myself. So what actually happened is I didn't know how to focus on myself. I wasn't hearing how to grow my own self-love so that I didn't have that drive and that need to try to find something in another person, because really everything that we seek in another person is actually in ourselves. And when we see it in another person, it's only because they're reflecting it back at us. And it's funny because at that point in my life, I met someone and I was like, oh my gosh, they're so much like me. We're so similar. It's incredible how we're just on the same wavelength. We're not at all. And we never were. But unfortunately, at the time, they were reflecting who I am back at me. And when I fell in love, what I actually fell in love with was myself, because they were literally just repeating back to me what I said to them. I'm not even kidding. It's, in retrospect, really wild to understand that that's what happened, but more recently I could see it because I finally became aware of it and understood all of this that I'm telling you. So then, when it would happen that they would just regurgitate things back at me, it became really obvious. Like, really obvious. Like, to the point that it's like, what is going on with this person? Do they not have a mind of their own? And it's especially evident when the only time they speak is to just repeat back to you what you said. And it's also interesting when they kind of like save it and then bring it back out a little while later, like the next day or a week later or something like that. And they act like it's new. New information, like, oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, I said that a week ago, hon. What the heck? And that is just one example of why, when we go out into the world desperately seeking another person and desperately seeking something that we think we're missing in another person, is so dangerous to ourselves. And I'm not in any way disparaging love. I'm not saying relationships are bad. What I'm saying is our approach to relationships can potentially be harmful to ourselves, because we really need to work on ourselves first and to learn self-love and self-trust, learn our own power and value, and really, really put ourselves first and hold boundaries. And we need to be able to do all of that before entering into a relationship, because if we don't, once we're in that relationship, we may lose ourselves. And when I say that, I suspect someone out there, possibly many of you, knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you've seen this happen, where you get into a relationship and you're in it for a while, and one day you wake up and you're like, I'm not even sure who I am anymore because I feel consumed by this person. I feel like my whole life has become about them and in reaction to them, so much so that I've lost sight of what matters to me. And that is the real danger, is that we lose ourselves. And an even greater danger is that we actually end up with somebody who abuses us, like emotionally, physically, etc. But simply being in a position where we're giving too much of ourselves away is dangerous in its own right without them actively abusing us. So that is why when I see so many people talking about how they're looking for their twin flame, they want to know how to find these people, they want to know how to call a new love to them, that's why when I see those things, it makes me sad. And in a way, it makes me sad for the person that I used to be, because I was that person. And I wasn't necessarily actively out there trying to do those things. But I always had my sights set on who's the next person going to be that I have a relationship with? Who can I find? Who is out there? Who can bring things to the table that make me feel more whole? And that's completely the wrong mindset to have. And I'll be honest, thus far, I haven't had a relationship that didn't start that way. So I've never had a healthy relationship. And I'd like to, but I'm currently in the middle of a self-love journey and really cementing my own self-trust and centering myself on my own needs and viewpoints and just who I am, and really just learning to trust myself completely in every way and building my self-confidence. So what's really important is, how do you do all these things? How do you build self-love and trust and confidence and all of these concepts? Because it's something we hear about a lot, but practical advice. And I say this a lot, I feel, in my videos. I'm all about practical advice and literal, here are the steps you take to start to make improvements. Because I feel like so much in esoteric realms of thought, we get the advice to practice self-love without really getting an understanding of what that actually looks like. And the same with all these other esoteric concepts like letting go of your fears and all of this stuff. Like, we're told to do these things without necessarily being told how to do these things. So let's talk about self-love. For me, this was an incredibly confusing and nebulous concept a year or so ago, and before that. Because I hear it and I'd be like, I don't understand what that means, I don't know what to do, and I would kind of get overwhelmed and panic and just drop it for ages. Which is why it's so important to me to share these steps and this information with you. So, number 1, and I know you've heard this before, and it sounds cliched, but bear with me. Affirmations. I personally was freaked out by affirmations because I could not imagine looking at myself in a mirror and saying things like, I love you, which in and of itself shows you just how lacking in self-love I was. I can do that one now. I can do most of them, actually, but I still choose to do my little solution, which was what finally got me started on doing affirmations in the first place. I gave myself permission that I didn't have to say it in the mirror. I could write them down. And it took me reaching a point where I was like, I'm going to make this work for me to finally make progress in this area. And this was one of the first things that I did. So I got myself a cheap little notebook. I think it was a couple of dollars at Target. And in the front page, I just wrote kind of a letter to myself of how I was going to use it, which was essentially that every day I was going to write 5 things that were positive about me. And these can be kind of your standard affirmations like, I love myself, I'm confident, I'm strong, etc. Or it can be, I donated money to a guy on the street who needed it. Just as long as it's positive. It can also be something you want to draw out of yourself that you think you may be lacking. And always phrase it positively. So like, I am confident, not I need to be more confident. Always say I am, and then whatever it is. If you're trying to basically draw a quality out of yourself that you want to have or you want to exude more of. So that can be, I am strong, I am confident, I am beautiful, I am abundant, I trust myself, etc. And just every day, write 5 things. If you miss a day or more, add those days the next time you do it, which I do a lot of times on the weekend. Like, I might not write on the weekend, so Monday I'll do 3 days worth. And I date them all as well, which is really cool because then you can kind of look back at like how long you've been doing it and assess your progress. And I very often tailor what I write each day to how I'm feeling that day and what I think I need in that moment. And I realize, because this is how I felt, that writing something in a notebook sounds like it wouldn't do anything. But what you're actually doing is every time you sit down and you write those affirmations, or you say them out loud, or you say them to yourself in the mirror, your pick, every time you do that, you're not just communicating to your conscious mind, you're communicating to your subconscious mind as well. And that's where the magic starts to happen, because it's in there that you can kind of start to reframe your experience and how you see yourself. So continuously say these things to yourself, which is saying them to your subconscious mind, and you'll start to see it becomes a feedback loop. It takes time. For me, I really started to notice changes in how I felt and approached the world and everything in a few months. Because I believe I started in October, and it was around January, February, I was able to look back and go, wow, I really changed my outlook in these ways. This is really doing something, and it's really pretty amazing. And it even changes the way I see my own face in the mirror. It's that powerful. Because I can now look in the mirror and think of myself as pretty, whereas I struggled with that before and really didn't feel it at all. But that's changing. So, do yourself a favor and just start writing 5 things every day and see what happens. It's an easy thing to do. It takes so little time. It takes very little materials. And it can just be one little self-care gift that you give to yourself every day. It's also really nice to kind of sit down and take that time for yourself, which brings us to point 2, which is self-care in general. And again, this is something that's talked about, and yet you can end up with a lack of understanding because maybe some of the practicality isn't really explained. So, and this is my opinion, of course, but I see self-care as any time you prioritize yourself. That can be setting aside time to do something that's just for you. It can be prioritizing something that is a need of yours and recognizing that something is a need rather than a want. It can be saying no to obligations to prioritize yourself. It's definitely setting boundaries. That's a big one. And we'll talk about boundaries another time, but in the meantime, there's plenty of other channels that talk about this stuff too. Self-care can be giving yourself permission to go down a road that maybe you weren't allowing yourself to go down. It can be doing therapy. It can be doing work on yourself. It can be getting in touch with your inner child. All of those things. Self-care is literally when you do things that show yourself that you care for yourself. And it's definitely not just spa days. There's hard work in there too, but it's worth it because you're worth it. And the last one I'm going to bring up in this particular video, because there's so many other ways that you can start to learn self-love, but these 3 are big ones, or at least they have been for me. Huge for me has been inner child work and understanding the trauma of my past and how that affected me, because that enables me to move forward. So for inner child work, my favorite technique has been to picture in my mind's eye my inner child, and they will kind of appear as a certain age, and you don't have to decide that. You can just try to picture yourself as a child, and whatever age they appear at is where the area you need to work in first, or in that moment. It can also help if you happen to have a photo, especially if you have, I think it's aphantasia. A photo can be really, really useful of yourself from whatever age you feel is appropriate to start at. So basically what you do is you picture in your mind's eye, or you look at the photo and you talk to your inner child, and you tell them the things that you would want to hear from someone else, whether that's a parent, a friend, or a significant other, or a mentor. So you look at your child and you tell them that you love them, and you tell them that they are safe with you. You tell them that you are proud of them and that you respect them and that they matter to you. Just say all the things that you long to hear out of someone else's mouth, no matter whose mouth that is. Anything you long to hear, tell that to your inner child. And every time you find yourself longing to hear those things, take a minute of self-care and tell your inner child, even if you're like on the subway and you just sit there with your eyes closed and have this internal conversation. And absolutely 100%, if you can do it, picture yourself hugging them and holding them and just really imagining yourself almost parenting them, or in a way re-parenting them, because likely if you're here, that's an issue, and it is for so many people. So it's perfectly okay to accept and understand that, and it does not make you a bad child to acknowledge your parent had flaws and that you have to do things to now make up for that and heal yourself. Another technique with your inner child is a journaling technique, and I push journaling a lot mainly because it's been something that I've done a lot of and has really worked for me. So it's the one I kind of know the most about and have the most experience with. So basically what you do is with your dominant hand, you write a question that you want to ask your inner child. And then with your non-dominant hand, and yes, this is super uncomfortable at first, you write the answer. And you write the first thing that comes into your head. And this takes practice. Because initially, you're going to say, this is weird. I'm just answering my own question with whatever I feel like saying. Yes, it feels that way at first. You get used to it. 2, it feels weird because you're writing with a different hand. And 3, it just seems like an odd thing to do. I get all of that. As it turns out, this is a really powerful technique. Because for one, when you do this and you frame it as speaking to your inner child, you start to give yourself permission to say things, even admit things to yourself that you would not have before. For example, this didn't happen the first time I did this technique, but later down the road, my inner child said, I hate my mother, I hate my father, and I hate my stepfather. I hate all of them. Which is not something I would have admitted before because I would have felt guilty. But you know what? It's true. I do have that level of anger for the stuff that they did. And granted, as an adult, I don't want to have that anger, but to my inner child, I say, you get to feel that way. You have every right to feel that way. And what I'm doing in doing that is parenting my inner child in a way that I didn't receive as an actual child because I was essentially taught to stuff my feelings down. And doing this over and over with time, it grows more comfortable and you start to pull out deep truths and you start to accept things that maybe you didn't allow yourself to accept in the past. Things you feel, things you know, things you remember. You become more comfortable accepting them using this method, and that enables you to start to integrate them into your conscious mind from your unconscious, which is essentially kind of sort of your inner child. It's a little more complicated than that, but just to be really simple about it. So I sincerely hope you will try these techniques. And I truly, truly hope that before you go looking for love in someone else, that you find the love you have in yourself, because it is infinite and it is beautiful. And once you unleash it, for real, just open it up and let it flow through you, then you can really start to have genuine and fulfilling relationships with other people, whether that is family, friends, or lovers. So thank you for tuning in and sticking with me this far. I love you all, and I'll talk to you next time.